Jonathan Albon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you were just saying that you're unfortunately suffering from COVID right now. So I appreciate you taking the time. How are your symptoms? Are you feeling okay?
Not so bad. Like I thought I was gonna, I hadn't had it all the way up until now. But I guess there's never a good time to have it. But I think just after a race, we're still 2 months before the next race, is probably the best time I could hope for if I was going to get it in the summer. So I'm not feeling too bad, but not feeling too great either, and just take it one as it comes.
Yeah. Do you suspect you picked it up on your way back from Mont Blanc Marathon? Are you back home?
I think there was a few people I've been on contact that have actually had it and then tested positive since. So I just got home yesterday and tested positive as well. So wow. That's the way it goes. We'll see. Everyone seems to react to it quite differently. And it's definitely probably better to have it now than 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to do this, even under the circumstances. And, obviously you have been around the scene for a while now, but you and I don't know each other. And I think this is a great opportunity to do more of a deep dive on your story, introduce you to more of an American audience as well. I've been a longtime passive observer of your career, and I think your story is really interesting. And I think we should sort of start from the beginning, as far back as you feel comfortable going. Maybe let's just start with a generic background conversation. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing, where you're from, how you ultimately made your way into sport, and now living in Norway.
So as a kid, I had a really usual English upbringing, a little town just outside of London, went to a normal school. I was actually a pretty nervous kid, to be honest, a little bit of an introvert. Didn't really spending that much time with big groups, or being not a loner, but just bumbling my way through relatively happily. But I actually played skate hockey as a kid. So it's exactly the same as ice hockey, but on wheels. So that was
we call that roller hockey. Yeah.
Roller hockey. That was my sport. So I played from when I was 9 up until I was 20. I finished school. I went to university, but went to a local university so I could stay home, worked at the same time, during the evening. So real standard kind of upbringing, I guess, until I got a job working on the London Underground as a building surveyor, and started to run to and from work to keep fit or cycle. And I'd already quit hockey, but I knew I needed to sort of keep fit. So I started to use my commute as my training, and also started entering into a few events. I think the first one was Tough Guy. So it's this obstacle race where you break through ice in the middle of winter. You crawl under barbed wire, jump over fire, all this crazy stuff. And I kind of wanted to see if I could do it. I'd never really tested myself as a man. So I thought I'd try and find out whether I was tough enough. I did it. I got really cold, but actually managed to survive through. And then it was at that point that obstacle racing became a thing. Spartan suddenly appeared, Tough Mudder, all these races started coming about, and I just started entering into them because they were pretty fun, a full all-round fitness, and it kind of felt good to train for them. And I started pretty much winning all the ones I was training for. So that kind of then meant I wanted to train more and win more. And I kept telling myself they weren't that competitive. It was just, a new sport, fun to do. Yeah. But I still obviously enjoyed doing them. So I was training away, doing these races, doing pretty well. And then my partner, now wife, said, "Do you want to move to Norway?" Because she's Norwegian. And I was yeah, all right. So quit my job in London, really big, scary thing for little nervous John. Moved to Norway, but didn't get a job immediately. So spend 4 or 5 weeks training as a professional athlete almost, because I had all the time in the world. And it was at the same time that I went out to the States to run the Obstacle Racing World Championships and the Spartan World Championships. And when I won both of them, I got back to Norway and was oh, maybe I am quite good at this sort of obstacle racing stuff. And my partner said, well, you can't get a job because you can't talk Norwegian, so why don't you just be a runner? And I was all right. So that's what I've been doing since. So that was, say, 7 years ago, and now I've been an athlete since. From the obstacle racing, I kind of went over into more trail running and mountain running and sky running as well. So I kind of had 50-50 kind of season. And then in the past 2 years, I've been more sort of trail focused, because the races are a bit more competitive. You have to really have good shape on certain days. So I've had a little bit more of a focus on the trail and mountain, but still do some obstacle racing. And that's just how I've made a living the past years.
So cool. Well, thank you so much for that illustration of your evolution as a human being and as an athlete. And there's so much in there that I think we'll expand on. But maybe first, just talking about your existence up there in Norway. It sounds like your wife is Norwegian, and that's how you guys ended up there. Where in the country are you? Aren't you in Bergen?
So we were in Bergen. That's where we moved initially, because my wife was going to do her master's. And Bergen was great. Like, it rains all the time. Like, it rains so much. But the trails are really nice. The mountains, like, a bit small, but they've got nice trails. Like, it's a great place to train and great athletes. But when Corona came along, we had to go back to Bergen because you weren't really allowed to be away from where you live. But we kind of didn't really want to go back there. Like, we felt like we'd done pretty much Bergen as much as we could. So we thought, where do we want to go? And we just drove up to Romsdalen. So it's like 8 hours drive north. It's near where Emily and Killian live.
Yeah.
And the mountains are pointier. It's like more alpine. You got way better ski season, like crazier trails, mountains, scrambling, climbing, like everything was kind of just a bit like extra. So we got here and we immediately felt like we were at home, and we've been here for the past 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, maybe does that reflect what you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation? You being sort of like happy being on your own, maybe not a loner, but you said that in your childhood, you were happy to just kind of do your own thing. It seems like being 8 hours north of Bergen in Norway, it seems like it's probably a fairly remote existence, even if it is peaceful and in a mountain environment. Is that maybe a reflection of your personality as well?
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I do like nature way more than I like people. So I think this suits me down to the ground. But then that being said, there is an amazing community of athletes here. Like, there's some crazy athletes that live in this small area. We're skiing together in the winter. We're running together in the summer. And I've learned so much, especially from Killian since I've been here, about like specifically training to be a mountain and trail endurance athlete. So I've actually learned so much from the people here, but it's also really quiet. Like, there's not that many people here. I sleep so well because it's like not one sound at night. Like, there's so many perks of kind of being tucked away and then sort of coming out and then sort of like racing with all the crowds and stuff, and then being able to come back and chill out in sort of a really nice, quiet little area.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, your relationship with Killian. I think one of the reasons why he and Emily moved up there is because it would allow them to experience that quiet and solitude, and especially them being world famous champions. I'm sure they're enjoying what you described in their personal lives. But you and Killian, it seems like, have been doing some training together. You even raced each other at sort of a local half marathon. That would have been a really fun thing to witness, you two guys going at it in remote Norway on a road half marathon. But maybe, give us a glimpse into what you just described, your and Killian's relationship, what you've learned from him, and any sort of details you can give about how you guys train together.
Yeah, I hope I haven't ruined Emily and Killian's sort of quiet little corner of the world too much by moving here as well. But no, it is really cool because the first thing we really notice is some days, you just don't want to be training. It's like tough. You've been training a lot. You get out, but then you see someone else out doing the exact same thing. And you realize, well, they're doing it, like I can do it. And your level of commitment automatically gets risen because the athletes here are really committed. And for them, it's no big deal to go out training every day, twice a day, 3 times a day. So then for you, it's not that hard either. And you can kind of feed off that. But Killian especially, like, I've definitely changed training philosophies since being around him. So I really think he hasn't just taken like a road track running philosophy and then applied it to the mountains. He's actually developed his own way of training for endurance mountain and trail running, which is, I think, very different to how you sort of approach the training for it. So that was like crazy for me. And I think by applying a bit more of that philosophy, I've really improved myself. But also can
you be more specific about that? Like, is there anything in particular?
One big thing is, like, I always used to train sort of how you're meant to. And I always thought, like, I train properly. I train most of my miles really slow, and then some of my miles like really fast, kind of thing, like the 80-20 kind of like really polarized training. And I thought that was like the best. And then I see these really good athletes and I see the fact that they're like pushing a bit harder a lot more of the time. And I think, well, they're training wrong. But then when you look at Killian and you think he's training wrong, it's like, well, he's the best. So how is he training wrong? So I realized actually with my approach, it was great for me at the time and I got some really good results off of it. But I was spending very little time actually running at race pace, which is really important. Obviously in track and road running, your race pace is kind of threshold speed. So when you're pushing really hard, that is your kind of race pace. But for us running 2, 3, 4, like up to 20 hours in the mountains, we are generally racing slower and you need to spend time at that speed to become efficient. So I found that I was actually doing my miles too slowly or too fast. I was never really building this efficiency at this sort of middle speed or this sort of like zone 2 kind of half hard, not really hard, but not really slow either.
Yeah.
And it's just uplifting because that sort of effort level is like way more fun. You get more endorphins, you get more training done in a shorter amount of time, so you get more time to recover from. So there's like loads of perks, which I never really actually realized. So that was like really uplifting. It meant I could go on those useless mountain adventures where you push a bit hard and think of it as training rather than think of it as a wasted day out.
Yeah.
So that was great. Like that was really cool. And I really do think that incorporating that into my training has helped like a lot. It's just, yes, the injury risk is a bit higher if you're going to do it all pounding miles on the road. So you have to be careful. And that's why the skiing or cross training, like cycling in the summer, skiing in the winter for me is really important. So you can do this kind of like pushing a bit a lot more often, but try and reduce the injury risk because if you do it cross training, you haven't got the same pounding as with the running. So really trying to use that cross training so you can do that middle or moderate or steady intensity has been really important. Wow. So taking that sort of like that philosophy and then applying it in my own way has been like really, really cool.
Very, very cool. Well, let's talk more about training here in a sec, but first I want to ask you, because it's something I talked to Killian about on the podcast recently as well, that I think you could probably provide fun perspective on, you two being foreigners in Norway. And we talked about sporting culture in Norway and sort of why Norway has been able to produce such phenomenal champion endurance athletes in this current era. If we think about the Ingebrigtsen brothers in track, Christian Blumenfeld and Gustav Iden in triathlon, of course, Stian in trail running. Any comments on Norwegian sporting culture that have maybe rubbed off on you, or why the country has been so successful in this current era of endurance sports?
I don't know. I think like two things, especially as Norwegians, when they set their mind about doing something, they do it really well. So even if when you see like kids at the gym, or not kids, but teenagers at the gym, they all seem to have warm-up routines, cool-down routines, like special stretching and foam rolling routines. They've like done their homework. They're all doing to the best of their ability. And that seems to be like a Norwegian trait, maybe, that if they're going to do something, just absolutely apply themselves and do it really well and do their research. And also there's a big skiing culture here, especially with cross-country skiing. A lot of kids are skiing from when they're young, so they get a good engine build without the sort of impact and the running-related injuries, which are really common. So you get that engine built, and then you can specify it to running maybe a little bit later in their life if you haven't made it as a skier, because to make it as a skier, you have to be really good.
Very good.
So then these athletes can kind of sort of then go off and find their niches. But I mean, with the Ingebrigtsens and Blumenfeld, like that's maybe not their background, but that's how I feel about like a lot of other athletes.
Fascinating. So let's go back to talking about training a little bit. In our little text exchange as we were setting up this conversation, you mentioned that you and Zach Miller had recently had a long conversation about the fundamental differences between European training philosophy and American training philosophy, or something to that effect. So maybe summarize that conversation with our great American champion, Zach Miller, and then maybe that'll set up us talking about your specific training and what you've been up to recently.
I think I'm not sure, like it was a few weeks ago now, so I think I've forgotten the majority of it. But I think one of the main things he was so surprised about is the fact I would go out running, or at least training, twice in a day. And that was like a big thing. So apparently the majority of Americans, it's kind of like a 1 a day kind of thing, like a 2, 3, 4 hour kind of one-off session most days. Whereas for me, that's like 1 or 2 days a week I do that. Whereas other days, my normal day would be to say 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, for example, and then keep the quality up a little bit, I guess. And that was probably one of the main differences, I think. But we did have a lot of in-depth conversations all the way into the wee hours of the the night. So it would have been good for me to write down a few of them.
Well, so let's just kind of use your training as an example, because I sort of perused your Strava a little bit, and it does seem that you're a really versatile athlete and you do a lot of different things. One of the things I'm also curious about, as we've sort of discussed Norway at length already, is the winter training and sort of how that sets up the rest of your season as an obstacle course racer, and especially as a trail runner. You mentioned that cross-country skiing is big in Norwegian culture. It probably indicates that it's something that you do during the winter months. What's your focus during those dark winter months up in the north? And how does that set up your season?
So it was actually something that I kind of was almost forced into doing more of, because I had a problem in my foot. So if I ran more, it hurt more. And I knew I had to take time off in the winter from the running so I could get through the summer season. And I never actually managed to rest the foot enough to get it fixed. But it's actually something I did manage to fix during Corona with an operation. But I had at least 4 or 5 years where I had 2 small bones in my foot that were broken, and it was painful. So I knew I had to train, but only run enough to have good shape. So that meant I had to find a good form of cross training in the winter. And in Norway, skiing is just something you almost have to do because everywhere's covered in snow. So I was already doing a bit of cross country skiing, but that's when I got into skimo and ski mountaineering. So bought some skis and absolutely fell in love. It's a crazy sport, so fun. The conditions change every day. It's just like an amazing form of training, low impact, but just amazingly fun as well. And that means you want to do more of it. When you do more of something, you get better. And just generally, it was like an amazing form of training. So I started doing skimo more, and that's just been more and more each winter. So now in the winter months, especially, I'm aiming for between 10 and 15,000 meters of climb a week on the skis. And then plus still trying to maintain some running, 30 to 50 kilometers, but mainly on the treadmill, mainly kind of good quality, just keeping the biomechanics there.
And then you cross-country skiing too?
Yeah, some, but not as much. Skimo has taken my heart, It's so that much special of a sport, Yeah. It just makes sense to me because it's a form of skiing. You can do any size mountain, any steepness pretty much. You can go out, any snow conditions, you can go out with your skimo skis and you can have a hell of a lot of fun. Whereas cross country, someone has to drive this track. You have to kind of, use these tiny little skis, which are pretty useless, except for when you're following this nicely made track. And if the track doesn't get driven that often, it's less fun. It's just kind of a bit more specialist. So that's kind of in my mind, kind of, the difference between track running and trail running. One is kind of a bit more controlled and you do it and it's fun, but it's not it doesn't steal your heart. Whereas skimo was kind of getting out into the mountains, exploring, it just resonates with me on so many different levels compared to cross country. So
like I mentioned, I just had Killian on the show and we recorded at 10 p.m. Norwegian time and it was still perfectly, light outside. And of course, the opposite is also true. I'm sure that in the winter months, it's dark, dark, dark. Do you think that hardens the Norwegian athletes to deal with those months of cold and dark? And maybe provide any details that you can about what it's like sort of training through those winter months. Are you using a headlamp for most of your sessions or just taking advantage of the few hours of daylight that you get?
Yeah, I think definitely as a professional athlete, that's a big perk that you can just go out during the middle of the day when there's more daylight.
Yeah.
But I do use headlamps a lot as well and go out and do a lot of night sessions. Actually, when you've got bad visibility, flat light in the mountains, to go out with a headlamp is way better. So sometimes you'd wait for it to get dark. It's just then you need a powerful enough headlamp so you can see when you're skiing. So a moonlight kind of 3,000 lumen headlamp is almost like a necessity. And then that makes it really possible to go out in the dark. But I mean, it is tougher in the winter, but it is something you get used to. But I still think it's way worse if you're going to wake up at 6 a.m. and go out and get your session done before work and then go to work. For me, that toughness is just incredible. And I can't believe that people actually manage to get these hours done and have a full-time job and a family as well. So I think that probably builds more toughness than being a professional and having to train a little bit in the dark.
Yeah. Just something I was curious about, just the basics of getting the training in throughout the winter months when you live in.
I think you do definitely get used to it. And it's the cold, especially, you just dress up warmer. When it snows, it's actually a hell of a lot lighter because it kind of reflects light a lot more. So it's not as bad. And you generally look forward to each day because the weather's always slightly different, or the snow conditions are slightly different. So time just passes because you get like weeks with certain types of conditions and then other weeks that don't. And you just kind of live by the forecast, plan your training by the forecast. And it's amazing how time just sort of like flow by.
Yeah. Interesting. So talking a little bit more about your strengths and weaknesses as an athlete. I mean, you've just been on an absolute tear recently, and we can go through some of the race results, but in looking through some of your blogs, it seems that you sort of view yourself as a very strong descender, but not as strong as a climber. Talk about that balance and how you manage to, or like how you view yourself as an athlete, how you're working on perceived weaknesses and embracing perceived strengths.
So yeah, I think like generally I was always a better descender. I always blamed it on being like not heavy, but like a little bit bigger than some of the athletes on the way up, but also just less specifically trained. Mm-hmm. Like I never really worked on my uphill running stride. I think I've got a natural flat running stride, but an uphill running stride is completely different. Like your feet are more under your shoulders rather than sort of like crossing in front of each other. Oh. And I grew up somewhere that's very flat. Like I'd never actually run uphills until I was sort of like 18, 19, 20. So it was like, that's a big difference. It took me a little while to realize I actually have to work specifically on that running stride and just work on my general VO2 max or general engine size. And I think doing the majority of my training quite slowly in previous years meant that I wasn't really building the size of engine I really needed or that capacity to be able to go uphill for a long time at a good speed. And also the specific speed work as well. Like I wasn't ever doing race pace uphill sessions really. I was either going too fast or too slow. So all that has kind of like played together. But one of the main ones was I did have this foot operation during Corona. Uh-huh. I got my foot fixed and then I could train how I wanted to. Like I could actually do the sessions that I wanted to and do the sort of more fun sessions too. And that sort of changed everything.
Amazing. So maybe that's one of the contributing factors to this incredible run of success that you've had recently. So I want to talk a little bit about OCR because it's a fascinating part of your story. And I think probably also has been a contributing factor to you being such a great trail runner as well. Maybe talk a little bit about how your relationship has evolved with OCR over the years. You mentioned that you sort of got into it as it was experiencing this massive period of growth, and you've sort of lived through a similar moment here in trail running. And you mentioned that trail running is sort of taking up a little bit more of your time and energy now. What's your relationship with OCR, and maybe how did your experience in that sport lead to your immense success as a trail runner?
Yeah, I think like when I first started obstacle racing, pretty much Tough Guy was the only one. And then since then, there came loads of little obstacle races, especially in the UK, and I was doing absolutely all of them. And since then, the big ones have really kind of like, destroyed all the little ones because, you know, the sport there's a little bit more money and there's like more marketing and there's like the little ones have kind of died off and then the big ones like Spartan are kind of left. And I've kind of like seen the sport go through all the stages up until where it is now, where it's a little bit more organized, but still far from being as organized as a sport should be. And I think like my general fitness and career developed at the same time. So from when obstacle racing was just about fun to being really serious and competitive, I developed as an athlete. It was just about being fun. And then I got better and also I got more serious and I got more competitive and I managed to grow at the same time. And that meant I learned like a lot of the skills and I changed like generally as a person as that sport developed. And then I sort of like, grew with it. And that really shaped my career anyway, because it was kind of like, it just like sent me on this trajectory or this wave that I've been on ever since. And I've just said yes to certain experiences or offers and then gone along with that wave and somehow managed to end up where I am now, which for some reason feels right. But if I'd been that 20-year-old and said, I want to have won this trail world championships or won that race, I don't think I would have ever got here because I wouldn't have like found that sort of like magic path to where I am now. So I think like it seems to have happened really naturally. And I think that's been great for me. And I have to say, like, thanks to obstacle racing for that. But also obstacle racing as a sport, like it builds you as a person. Like you really do get this all-round fitness and this sort of like little bit more of a toughness to you. So that means that when you do end up towing the line at a trail run or a road race, it's like it doesn't seem that bad because you're not going to have to crawl under barbed wire. You're not going to get ripped up by thorn bushes or jump into a freezing cold lake. It's like really not that bad. And maybe then that just means that when I do go and do other races, which are a little bit less tough, it's like just easier for me. I don't sort of think of it as being as tough as everyone else would.
Yeah, it's a psychological edge. Probably something you also develop living through the winters in Norway. This is maybe a theme. But living through this massive period of growth in both OCR and trail running probably gives you a unique perspective. Do you have any commentary on what it's been like living through this period in both sports, and maybe anything that you're excited about or worried about between each sport independently?
Yeah, I think they're both great sports because they're both relatively like how they started. And that's probably due to the fact they're not in the Olympics. And the Olympics is like the great killer of sports. Like it pretty much changes sports to being more spectator friendly, but so far away from their roots or their purity. And kind of obstacle racing and trail running are still kind of just the sports they were at the beginning. Like definitely obstacle racing has changed quite a lot. But they do still represent sort of like how they started as sports. And I think that's really, really cool. And that's like really nice. But that does mean that the sports are less organized than they should be. And there's still, especially in trail, like so many different factions. Like you've got Sky Running, UTMB series, Golden Trail series, the World Championship type stuff. It's like there's so much different things. You rarely get one race where all the best people are competing against each other. But then trail running is so diverse that you can't really have one race that would sum up who is the best, because all mountains are different shapes and sizes. Like no one trail is the same. There's so many different distances and elevation climbs and climate and terrain differences. Like it is really hard to sort of sum everyone up. So it's like, it's great in one sense, and also it is tough in another sense to really be able to tell yourself that you are that good. And that's something I've struggled with for like a long time. I've always just told myself I'm not that good. Like to begin with obstacle racing, not that much of a competitive sport. I was just good because no one else was doing it or taking it seriously. Now with trail running, you're never at a race where all the best people are there. And if there are some good people there, you convince yourself they had a bad race or the course didn't suit them and it suited you or this and that. So I've often seen myself as like kind of like you've got the Killian bracket, you've kind of got the Stian and the Remy bracket, and then you've got me in the bracket beneath. Okay. And I've been desperately trying to claw myself up the brackets. And in the last 2 years, I'm hoping I've made it into that second bracket. Yeah. But I'm still like yet to really tell myself that I have. And that's great because it keeps me hungry and it keeps me training hard and it keeps me like really pushing to improve. But then it also isn't great that you toe start lines and you're not confident in your ability. And you have to continually prove to yourself during the race that you deserve to be there and that you can do really well. So there's pros and cons of that as well.
Yeah. Just a personal curiosity, as a professional in both sports, where can you make a better living as a professional obstacle course racer, as a trail runner? And how has that changed?
I think obstacle racing was always where I made all my money because the prize money could be really good and I was winning pretty much everything. So that was great. Like I could make great money off obstacle racing. Like it's a real big mass participation sport. And the organisers are pushing some of that money back into the prize money. Trail running had relatively crap prize money. But then once you do get good, the sponsorship can be much better and brands take it more seriously. And if you get into kind of that more corporate world of sponsorship, then you can make more money, I guess, with less effort. So
it's almost like the prize money is better in obstacle course racing, but the sponsorship money is better in trail running. Is that right?
Possibly, but then when in the US, sponsorship is quite different and obstacle racing is viewed differently, especially Spartan racing is viewed different in the US. So possibly in the US, you could get just as much sponsorship money, but that's not something I've ever been very good at because one, I'm not very good at selling myself. Maybe I'm a little bit better these days, and two, I don't really like selling my soul on social media, like just accepting whatever money from whatever brand and pushing it out and posting loads and stuff. That's not really like what I enjoy doing. So then you're obviously going to make less money from sponsors.
This is why I love following you. Well, it's really interesting to talk about with you. And I think, you just have a very unique, perch of observation of both sports. And it's been fun to see you develop in both arenas. and also kind of see how obstacle course racing has left you in a position where you're just so freaking good as a trail runner. But do you feel that, I mean, you mentioned that in the last couple seasons, you've emphasized trail running more than obstacle course racing. And I don't think it's controversial to say that you've probably taken a step into that other bracket, right? Do you think that's maybe as a result of this more concentrated focus on trail running and maybe a de-emphasis on the obstacle course racing in your personal career? In other words, has an increased focus on trail running lent to improvement as a pure trail runner for you?
Yeah, I think once you get to the highest level of sport, you have to specify your fitness.
Yeah.
And that's something I've had to do towards trail running in order to be that good. And also I was racing so much before, and obstacle races, they do batter your body. So it's easy to be in tune with your body when you train for 2-3 months. You kind of know when your legs are sore, when they're fresh, how long it will take to get them back again. Do 1 or 2 obstacle races and you're jumping off walls, you're carrying stuff, you're really beating yourself up. Then it's really hard to tell what your body's like afterwards. So then it's really hard to specifically plan training to get the best possible shape on the day you need it. So I really do feel like I have had to cut back on the obstacle racing in order to really concentrate on those big trail races. And that's like a sacrifice I've had to make. But I definitely also feel that in the past 2 years, I've just generally become more of a dedicated athlete, or a stereotypical like athlete. You know, when you look at cyclists or triathletes or like road and track runners, they're allowed to just train to perform at races. When you look at trail and mountain athletes, it's like this unwritten rule that you're not allowed to train properly. You've got to go on little adventures and play on ridges and, just play all the time and stuff. It's kind of not really allowed to be really serious. But actually, like, I've tried to come with the terms of the fact that if I'm going to be that good, I have to try and be serious. And I have to make sacrifices and go on less fun training and do specific sessions. And by doing that, yes, it's slightly less fun. I do get to have a lot of fun in my training anyway, like way more than normal athletes, I think. But it just means that like I am in better shape for specific races.
Yeah. Fascinating. So is there anything that's maybe underrated as a versatile athlete yourself who does a lot of skiing and cycling? Anything that you feel is underrated in terms of like something that you do in training that has led to success on the trail that maybe other people don't think of as much, whether it's some sort of other training modality, strength training, lifting heavy things and training for obstacle course racing, jumping over things, crawling under barbed wire. I'm just curious, as we talk about being versatile as an athlete and keeping things fresh, but also training really specifically, like where the, potential marriage between those two concepts exists, between being versatile and also specific.
I think, like consistency is absolutely key. And that's what I've managed to do really well in the past 2 years. It's just consistently train well and do the right combination of sessions at the right time. At least that's what I think, in order to have good fitness. So I don't think there are any like magic bullets. If you do this one session, you'll get really good. There are definitely some sessions that really help certain things. But generally, if you want to get good, you just have to train generally well for a long period of time. Yeah. And that normally comes down to not getting injured. So whatever you can do to not get injured is really important. And then also just leaving behind the fact you think that like 5 by 6 minutes is the perfect session for you, or, it could be 6 by 5 minutes. Like, it really doesn't matter as long as you get the time at the right intensities. And that's something really cool with Killian. I could be running along for an interval session, see him, what are you doing? I think I'll do this, and then that, and then some more of this. Yeah, okay, I'll join. Like, it's not like a specific recipe where it's like 21 reps of this and then 2 reps of that. Like, obviously you can make sessions like that, but it doesn't really matter as long as you're doing the right amount of time at the right intensities at the right time of year in the right sort of quantities. Then you'll have good shape. And it's that sort of like big picture that counts more than saying, if I do this interval session 6 months away from my race, I'm going to have the best legs ever. It's like, it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah. Great point. Well, I want to remember to talk about your recent half marathon battle against Killian, because I think that would be a really fun story for the audience. But let's go back a little bit further. Like I mentioned, you've been on an absolute tear recently. You've just had one great race after another, and it seems like you've got a couple more fun things ahead of you this summer, but maybe let's start by talking about OCC last summer. I was doing the English commentary for UTMB, and so had a great front row seat to your phenomenal victory there. You and Robbie Simpson had a great battle. Ultimately, you smashed the course record, and you'd obviously accomplished a lot as a trail runner to this point in your career. But did anything change for you as a professional athlete after winning on that stage at UTMB? I know you've recently signed with the North Face, so maybe that's something that evolved after that accomplishment. But maybe any other comments about how that OCC victory came to be and how it maybe changed your trajectory as an athlete?
Yeah, I think that OCC win was like one of the most painful things I've done in my life. I just assumed he was going to win through the whole thing. And then when I actually started catching him, I was so disappointed because I knew I had to put myself in even more pain because I couldn't just give up, and I had to like destroy myself even more. And I'd be disappointed afterwards if I didn't. And I actually did then manage to catch him and then win, which was like a massive surprise to myself, but still like a really welcome one. But that definitely did change my career off the back of that season last year. I got really good ITRA scores. Like my ranking went up loads. I got talking to the North Face, and it was really this sort of shift from obstacle racing and more wet rock type trails to wanting to do races like the OCC or the UTMB or Marathon Mont Blanc, where it's a bit smoother trails, harder pack and stuff, and needing a different shoe in order to be able to do that. So I got talking to the North Face, and I generally became more of that professional kind of runner that had slightly less sponsors, but slightly bigger ones that are really going to help me on my journey and help me achieve like what I want to do in the next couple of years and become the new athlete I think I can be.
Yeah. It's funny because thinking back to the race and my front row seat that I just mentioned, it was clear that Robbie was the better climber of the two of you, but then you would provide, or you'd get a big gap on the descents. And then ultimately you pulled away, I think at Valersine before the final climb of the day. I think this is kind of a unique thing. Like you are such a good descender as an athlete, and it's rare that people are able to win the races, kind of as a good descender, right? And I don't know, is that maybe something that, because it seems like recently you've been emphasizing, your climbing ability, and looking at your blog post from the recent Mont Blanc Marathon, it seems like you feel like you've made big strides in that department in terms of just like your improvement and your ability to hang with the best athletes in the world and then use your strength as a descender to win, basically. Any reflections on, where that was born from? Was that something that you maybe realized during that battle with Robbie Simpson at OCC?
I'm not sure with the downhill running. I just never found it that difficult, maybe. Like I'm not sure. I don't get scared when I run downhill. Like I'm more scared standing edging in on an icy slope on the skis, for example. But I just, I think I've just managed to be good at it somehow. Like, I don't know, like my dad always said I never won races because I was like the fittest, but he said I won races because I gave a lot of heart or I tried really hard. Yeah. And maybe that's what you get rewarded from with the downhill, that if you just really go for it, you do well. But then also there is a skill to it. You do have to look up and see the path of least resistance and pick where you're going to run and see if there's any little shortcuts you can take and stuff. So there is a lot to it. But I think also it's one of those things that if you try really hard, you end up going faster. The key is to not just destroy your legs completely, that then you can't climb again. And there were some specific sessions I did before the OCC where I was hammering downhill to try and acclimatize my legs to the downhill. So then they could take that impact. And also the shoes helped as well, like the carbon plated shoes. The carbon plates used really differently to a road shoe. But one of the main reasons you have the carbon plates, you don't feel rocks poking you through the shoe. And it holds the rocker shape so you can roll downhill. And that really protects your legs, so your legs can just sort of like have a nice turnover without getting thundered. And I just really felt that from the first little downhill in the OCC, my legs would just sort of spin their way down. I think, why isn't anyone else running this quick? And it just felt natural to me. So that was a really nice feeling.
Yeah, from memory, I think I recall Robbie just like having a minute or two on you at the top of the climbs. And then when we get an update from the aid stations in the valleys, you'd always be in front of him or together. and then ultimately pulled away at the end for a phenomenal victory at OCC. But then also I watched the replay of Mont Blanc Marathon on YouTube, and they actually caught on camera, it feels like, where you sort of moved into that front pack at the top of the first climb, and you see your white singlet sort of coming over the top of the pass and start charging downhill. And it's clear that that's like a very specialized skill that you have, is just being a very good descender, especially in that technical terrain. So fast forwarding a little bit, you finished your season last year at Templiers, roughly 80K race in France, very important race. And it seems like that was a very proud performance for you. It seems like, you sort of put everything together on a course that, is a little bit longer than I would say you've typically competed on to this point in your career. What led to that sort of breakthrough at Templiers last year?
Yeah, I think that was a race where I just felt like I executed really well. And I have done longer races, so I knew I could run the distance. I'd run fast already in the year, so I did have that little bit of confidence that usually I'm lacking. But actually, the run into Templiers, I had like a bit of sickness. My ankle was really hurting. I was actually really down on myself. But just like as soon as the gun goes, usually I just get into this headspace and it doesn't feel that bad. And it was just a race where I also felt like the terrain really suited me. Like I'm not that used to doing big, long climbs. So typically, if it's more than 1,000-meter climb in one go, by the top, I'm like, I should have been going downhill like a long time ago. Like I prefer a little bit more undulating. And that's exactly what Templiers is like. No climb is more than 300 meters. So I felt like it suited me. And I feel like the racing I've done in previous years, like if you go back to like sky running like 5 years ago and stuff, they were all races that I don't think suited me. And then to actually over the last 2 years do races which I feel actually suit my strengths a little bit more has been like great. Because I've worked on my weaknesses and now I get to do courses which I actually see as being the ones that suit my skill set. So that was really cool, and everything just did come together. And I ran really well. Like fueling went well. Like I think I just felt like I executed the best I could on that day, even with a little bit of a bad period going into it.
In what ways do you think these races suit you more? Is it that sky running is too steep, too technical, too big of climbs, and races like Templiers and OCC, while mountainous, with a lot of vertical, the vertical comes in a more gentle fashion, there's less technical terrain? Or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think technical terrain I can handle like fine. That's great. But I think big, long climbs, like I said, I'm not that good with. Like I grew up somewhere really flat. Like it just seems that like when I get on a climb, the clock starts ticking and my effort level generally go up. I never really get comfortable just going at the same speed forever kind of thing. It just does feel like I'm on a timeline. That's something I have obviously tried to work on over the past 2 years and do feel like I am improving at. But I was never very good at the big climbs. But really my biggest problem was always elevation. Always living at sea level my whole life, and then suddenly getting up to 2,500 meters and being expected to race is horrible. It's disgusting. It's like terrible. Yeah. I like to feel strong when I run, and when you run at elevation, you feel weak and you feel crap, and it's just like you do perform a lot less well. So it's like that was always a big thing, and obviously with these trail races like Templiers, it wasn't elevation, and that was amazing for me. Like even OCC last year, I was there maybe 2 weeks before or 10 days before. And that was just enough that I feel like I managed to almost race like how I could do, but put it at sea level. And I can't help but feel like I'd race so much better. But that is something I got. Elevation tents were always illegal in Norway. Since Corona, the Ingebrigtsens, I think, kicked up a fuss because they couldn't go to their elevation camps. So now they've been made legal in Norway. So I have got an elevation tent. I did use one into Marathon Mont Blanc to sleep in. And I felt like that made a big difference, especially just psychologically, to arrive and feel like you have been sleeping at 2,500 meters. Like I know the pressure's not the same, but it did seem to do something. I think they do generally like work. So I think like that was like a big thing that's changed into this year as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And Templiers, I mean, the American audience is probably less familiar with it, but such a cool race to end the season there in France, and an awesome victory for you at an 80-kilometer distance. And I think all of us are very excited to see you race beyond that distance, which I think is something that you have planned for this year, but we can talk about that in a sec. Going back to what your dad said about you, and that like, you're not necessarily the most talented guy in the field, but you race with a lot of heart, and you probably, that bleeds over into a lot of other aspects of your life, probably in your training as well. Where does that come from in you? Is that a natural thing, or is that something that you've cultivated yourself over the years?
Maybe natural. Like, I was always a smaller kid. So maybe like it came from that. When I did play hockey, I was the one that just never gave up. So I'd like lose my stick. The ball would be like between my legs or something. I'd still trying to like play with it with my knees or something like that. Or someone gets a breakaway and I'd still be hammering like all the way back to try and catch them, sort of thing. I was just the tenacious one that just never gave up. And I guess then if you move that into a 3.5-hour mountain race, if you don't give up, usually you win, because at some point everyone cracks that little bit. Whereas if you're that person who would just start and just like keep going for it until you cross the line, then you normally do pretty well. And that's exactly how it feels sometimes with OCC. I just wanted the madness to finish. Like, I wanted it to end. And you step over the line and suddenly it's like, you can relax. Like, now you can just stop and you can just be still for like just more than 3 seconds at one time. Like, you can just stop, and that's like a really nice feeling. Yeah. It's just so intense for so many hours. And then at some point you just get to turn off once you cross the finish line.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I think people who do come from that team sport background sometimes have that mentality, being the hustle guy, or just like being a high effort character. I was how I performed my best, and how I developed my role on the teams that I played on as a lacrosse player growing up as well. Just being like the hustle guy, the guy that tried hard, the guy that played with heart. Yeah. And I think it does help in endurance sport as well. So,
but also with the pacing, it's like really important, because obviously there is this sort of like more type Kenyan, type American type go off absolutely all guns blazing, and then at some point blow up. So it's like a fine line between, you've got to start hard and you've got to keep going till the finish line, but you can't start so hard that that's physically impossible. Yeah. And I know the body can do way more than the mind thinks, but at some point it's like cracks form. And that's definitely seemed to what happened at Marathon Mont Blanc with some of the other guys, that they tried to follow me on that downhill, and it probably did cost their legs more than it should have, and they would just hang on until the very end rather than playing like a clever race. So you got to race with heart, but you've also got to race with your brain as well, and find the right combination.
Heck yeah. So let's talk about this season now. You started off with the marathon at the Maxi Race at the beginning of May, I guess it was, maybe about a month ago now, or I guess about 2 months ago now. And then you raced Kilian in a half marathon, and I sort of wanted to remember to talk about this. So maybe any takeaways from the Maxi Race marathon, or that half marathon against Kilian, before we finish by talking about the Mont Blanc Marathon?
No, I mean, really going from the winter with the skiing, there's so much cross training and so little running that it's this transition into the summer running, which is really important. So to make sure you up your mileage kind of very gradually, and make sure you do specific sessions where you damage your legs and then recover them so they get used to the pounding downhill. And then adding in races or training races is a big part of that, because sometimes you feel like you've got great shape at the end of the winter, but you race like crap. So then your shape has to go down a little bit, but your race form has to kind of come in, and you have to sort of train your gut to be able to handle the gels. You have to just generally get better at racing. So that's kind of what the Maxi Race was. It was a bit of a sort of get into a race. And it was a really cool race. And I was really glad that Peth Engdahl entered as well. So I had some good competition, because it's a training race, but you want to push hard and you want to treat it as a race. So it was a really cool experience, and Annecy is a really nice place. So that was really fun. And then the next race after that was meant to be Marathon Mont Blanc. So I had my training race, and the Marathon Mont Blanc was the big race. But there was a little local half marathon about 2 hours drive away. It goes from sea level up to 1,500 meters in a half marathon to 20K. So most of it is like around 8.5%, but there's two slightly flatter sections. And then the last 5K was more at 10%. So Kilian had a big training week. I had a big training week, but we both turned up, and kind of Kilian's done it a few times before. I'd never done it before. It was like, okay, this will be interesting. And we started, and I was actually surprised that I felt really comfortable. I was actually wearing the Alpha Flies, and Kilian was wearing his old trail trainers. So maybe that was the difference, but I felt like I was like way more comfortable climbing. It's just road running is that it's monotonous. After the first kilometer, I knew my legs would feel like that, but worse, just generally through the whole thing until the end. And that was like hard psychologically, but then maybe that was good for me psychologically as well. But what happened in the end was like I stuck with Killian. He'd take a turn in front, I'd take a turn in front. It was actually quite a lot of headwind, so that was kind of nice that we shared that. And then it just seemed that in that last 5K, it kicked up to 10%, and Killian just maintained the same speed, had the same stride, and I obviously slowed down a little bit because it got steeper. That's what humans do. So then he beat me by like 20, 30 seconds or something. So that was a really cool, training race. It was fun.
Sick though. You guys ran like 90 minutes for a half marathon with 5,000 feet of climbing in it. It's freaking probably a good confidence booster going into Mont Blanc Marathon for you, huh?
Yeah, definitely. Like that was a good confidence booster. Killian said to me, if I'd been Zagama, he thinks I would have done really well. So Killian believed in me, but then Killian's an optimist. So you can't really, Killian believes lots of things. And then it's normally only him that can actually end up making it. Proving it.
Always good when Killian is complimenting your fitness. It is the greatest.
Exactly, but still, like I said, I have got confidence issues. And the week before the race, you always convince yourself that, at some points, sometimes I say, okay, it seems like you have really good shape, but maybe you just will race crap.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that if you have good shape, you'll race well. So then you could even start getting nervous about whether you're actually going to fulfill the shape you think you have. So, you never go into a race feeling like you have great shape. You're going to absolutely nail it. The world is great. So there's always some psychological stuff to kind of deal with. But I've been racing a few years now. I just kind of get on with it. And thankfully the race went really well. And I raced one of the best races of my life. So all was well in the end.
So let's talk about that. I'm sure getting the validation, especially on an all uphill course, being only 30 seconds behind Killian in a half marathon, big confidence booster there. And then it seems like they adjusted the Mont Blanc Marathon course. It's typically a mountaintop finish. And this year you guys finished in the heart of Chamonix, sort of where the UTMB finish line is and the OCC finish line is, where you have special memories. Did they make that adjustment during race week? Because it seems like it probably played into your hands a little bit. Of course, we've talked about your strength as a descender. So a mountaintop finish probably wouldn't be something that you would dream about in terms of a course design. When was that adjustment made? And did that change your strategy or psychology going into the race?
I think I knew about that way long ago. So I think that's been that's been the course since they announced the race date and whatnot. So it definitely wasn't a last minute decision, but I definitely do think it didn't mean that it suited me any more or less. It just meant that maybe it did suit me more. Having a good downhill at the end. You rarely win races on the downhill, but at least means that you can plan your race accordingly and feel a bit more comfortable. Or if you do have a lead, you can kind of race a bit more strategically, knowing that end bit might suit you a little bit more. So that was great news for me. I generally feel like the course did suit me quite well. Especially the beginning was very runnable. It did climb 700 meters over 13K, but there wasn't much downhill, so it was kind of quite a runnable start. And I really do like a good warm up before I get into one of those big climbs. There's nothing worse for me than when it just goes straight up 1,000 meters or 2,000 meters from the word go, because I can just burn matches without actually getting into my effort level kind of. So I generally do think the course being a bit more of a roller coaster, it was sort of a bit more up and down with only one big 700 meter climb at any one point. That did suit me. And I think I prepared for all the specific sections as well, which really helped. I went out and recce'd all the sections and then put them together on race day. There was loads of stuff that just came together that meant they didn't feel like a marathon. I was just pushing, the race went, and all of a sudden 3.5 hours has gone by and I've crossed the finish line. So that's always a nice feeling. It shows you got good shape. It shows you prepared well. And it shows that you were hungry to race. So everything was in balance. So just had a really good day, I guess.
Yeah. In your post-race blog, you describe a moment where you realize that you're gapping the field on a climb, and you say something to the effect of, this never happens. You never drop people on climbs. Describe that moment in the race. And do you view it as a little bit of a breakthrough for you as an athlete?
Yeah, I think like definitely I proved to myself that I can climb better than before, but then like I have been working really hard on it, especially for the last 2 years. So that was nice, but then it didn't mean I could relax. Like it still meant that I knew that Emmys and the Avidas were like behind the guys I was dropping, and they are exceptionally strong on climbs, and they could just sort of like trot up quite easily and sort of catch me up. So it was just head down, work away, try and get into this sort of uphill running stride, like we touched on, and just keep going to the bitter end, because that's like what you have to do. Like even when someone said to me, you've got a 3-unit gap, I didn't believe them. Like it's just kind of like, you just got to continue racing anyway. Then I could race a little bit smarter,
rarely,
but still.
that information is rarely accurate, but in this case, it seems like it was. Yeah, well, awesome. I mean, and it should scare your competition when Jonathan Albon starts dropping people on climbs, because, you know, you're definitely one of, if not the best descender in the fields at this point. You and Sarah Alonso, the women's champion, both took pretty solid Superman falls in the last descent into Chamonix. Any other sort of like takeaways from the Mont Blanc Marathon as we begin to look ahead towards the rest of your season?
No, I think like that fall was actually, I was running down towards this hairpin switchback, and there's 4 guys there, one with a bike and the camera, and he's about to start filming for the live stream. So I look up, see them, catch a toe and fall over. So I generally feel like if they weren't there, I wouldn't have fallen over. Obviously, that's no excuse. Yeah. But it's like, just like you lose concentration for that split second and suddenly you're on your face.
Right.
And that does happen. Like it does happen. Like it's you fall over sometimes, just like.
Totally does. And both of you guys sort of did the full on belly flop, you know, like sort of sliding on your stomachs, and both looked like fairly painful. Are you, have you recovered from that fall? I mean, you're suffering from COVID right now. Any lingering residual damage from the impact?
No, I think like, especially with the obstacle racing background, any scratches and scrapes doesn't affect you whatsoever. What did affect me was the fact that my right calf locked up in cramp because of the fall. So that's why I kind of gave it a poke. It was like rock solid, but then just carried on running and just figured it would loosen up after 100 meters, which it kind of half did. So, I mean, really it was the abnormal movement that sort of like threw it into cramp, which was more detrimental. But by that point, it was just sort of, you got to get down no matter what. So you just keep running. And definitely the descent in the OCC was so painful, and I pushed myself so hard, it couldn't compare to that. So having that fresh in mind kind of did help a little bit, I guess. I had a little bit of a gap. I could be a bit more controlled, and all I had to do was try and get down without sacking it any more times.
So now looking ahead, the rest of the summer, you've got Sierra Zinal and then CCC, I believe. So, of course, Sierra Zinal is like 30K race, CCC 100K race, a distance that I think you've done, but it's not a distance that you would necessarily consider yourself a specialist at least at this point in your career. How are you looking ahead towards those 2 races?
Yeah, so that race plan, it wasn't really, if I was going to look at it and say like what I would need to do in order to be in the best shape possible for CCC, I don't think I'd probably choose to do Sierra now a week and a half before. It was just, it's one of those big famous races that I need to experience at some point in my life. So I just entered. But now with COVID, that actually maybe is a question mark. Like I definitely want to train for CCC and just do Sierra now. And Sierra now also isn't a race you just do. You train for it. You want to be fast. You want to show up for that race. So there's still some question marks there, but definitely in my mind, I want to train for CCC. So the idea is I did like a big base building block in the winter, and then sharpened up for these races now in the spring. And the idea is now I want to do like another big load block for the next couple of weeks before training specifically for the CCC. So that's kind of like the bigger picture plan. We'll just see where Sierra now falls into that. But definitely I want to do really well at CCC. I definitely found last year through the year, I managed to have the same gap pace from the shorter distances all the way through then into Templiers. So I don't think that's going to happen with CCC, but I definitely want to be one of those athletes, the more shorter distance, faster athletes, which then can turn up to a longer distance race and race it. No, sitting down in an aid station, I want to race this thing and I want to do a good time and I want to push hard and I want to treat it as a shorter race. It's just obviously that comes with a lot of risk, but that's kind of how I want to approach the CCC.
So going back to our conversation about the training, you said that in the winter you did sort of a long base building block and then started to sharpen up for the Mont Blanc Marathon. And you mentioned earlier that you sort of had an epiphany that doing your training at race pace is very important. So I'm assuming now you'll sort of transition to maybe longer runs and longer intervals at a slightly lower intensity than what you were doing for the Mont Blanc Marathon, as an example.
Yeah, definitely, especially like in the weeks before. It is a bit longer. I made a training app last year, and that's actually really helped me using it like religiously to actually construct my training and see the wood for the trees, or like see what I'm doing. So I'll be using the app through into the CCC, but obviously putting my own spin on sessions and just changing things slightly to suit. And I think that's what everyone has to do anyway. I don't think like there's any one training plan which is absolutely perfect for anything because everyone's different. So there definitely will be more longer, slower sessions and back-to-back sessions and brick sessions where I'm incorporating like a long bike ride and then a run to try and get the hours up and not just pound everything out on the feet, which comes with a bit of injury risk. So there's actually a lot of sort of opportunity there to go on some adventures and go and do some long scrambling days out and like have a bit more fun with the training. So I am looking forward to that. But then also doing some harder sessions where I sort of do some lactate buffering and just get my general fitness up, loads on the shorter, sharper stuff, because I generally feel to have that sort of all-round fitness is really good. And I think that is how you get the best result in races rather than being so specifically trained and just doing one type of session.
Yeah. Talk about how you use the bike, because again, I was looking at your Strava and it seems like you at least occasionally will do what looks like kind of hill rep sessions on a bicycle as well, which I'm assuming is an interval type intensity. I also noticed that after the Mont Blanc Marathon, you went on an e-bike ride. So it seems like you do spend a good amount of time in the saddle. What benefit have you seen from incorporating the cycling, both traditional and electronic?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the cycling is just that form of cross training I can do in the summer so I can get the hours up, but not have that added injury risk from running so much.
Yeah.
And I find it really helpful. I don't actually do that many intervals on the bike unless I've got like a running related injury. So those hill reps, that's actually just me going out and doing this middle speed, like not hard, but not easy. And the way I can get my heart rate up on a bike is to go uphill because it's kind of hard to push the pedals on the flat and get your heart rate up, I think, at least anyway, because I'm not that used to the bike maybe. And it's always fun to count meters climbed as well. So for me, it's just a lot more fun to go and do an hour and a half on like a 400-meter climb and just go up and down 3 or 4 times. And that's just sort of like fun for me, I guess. But I will use the bike for interval sessions if I have got like a running related injury, and I will use it for recovery as well. Like especially there's a lot of people which don't like e-bikes because apparently it's cheating, but for me it's just a way you can go on a 6-hour bike ride but not use that much energy. So it's kind of like just a way I'm visiting somewhere. Otherwise I just go on a 30-minute recovery jog and that's it, I'm done. Or I can go on like a 3 or 4 hour bike ride and see some cool trails and have a bit of fun and just be out in nature. So for me it's just another tool to be used. You obviously can't compare that bike ride to going without a battery because they're just not comparable. But I mean, it's still a tool you can use.
Yeah, it's super smart. It makes me want to ask one more thing about your Strava. It's something I noticed. It seemed like in the lead up to Mont Blanc Marathon, you and Eric Krogvig, another Norwegian superstar, did you guys just do like 6 reps up the local hill and take the chairlift down? It looked like you were just doing a vertical accumulation session, the two of you guys, and maybe what purpose did that serve?
Yeah, that was that they built a gondola nearby on this. There's actually the interval hill that we all use like the most, 700 meters climb in like 2.5K, I think, and they built a gondola to the top of it. So to go there. And like it might be that you've already run downhill a bunch, but you just want to get this sort of like boost of your base kind of. Yeah. So you don't want to do any more downhill running, but you still want to work your engine. So just go there, go up, take the lift down, go up, take the lift down, and just doing it as a pair, eating when you get to the top and stuff. It's kind of like almost fun 4 or 5 hours, just sort of like just doing something because we had so much snow this year that all the mountains were still covered. So it's not really possible to go on long scrambling days or like long trail runs. It was kind of like, where can we get this sort of like continual load done? and this hill had already melted out, and there's a gondola, so it's kind of like, we'll just go and use it. They built it, so you might as well use it.
Oh, use it. Cool. Well, Jonathan, it's been great to get to know you here in the convo. And I've just been a long time sort of like observer, admirer of yours as an athlete. I think you represent a really interesting sort of evolution of our sport, somebody who's world-class on OCR and now who's really coming into your own in that top bracket of trail runners. Let's close by just like talking about longer term goals. It seems like, I mean, if you do Sierras and all, then you're going to be in the mix for the Golden Trail series. You'll probably do, at least another one of those races, maybe do the world final this year, which I think is in Thailand. You're doing CCC. What else has you excited, whether it's this season or in the years ahead? Do you see yourself sort of transitioning eventually to the 100-mile distance, maybe doing a UTMB? What else is exciting you in the future?
I think in the immediate future, to do the CCC and then UTMB would be really cool. Last year was my first time in Chamonix during UTMB week, and it kind of like you do catch the buzz. So to do OCC and then climb the next rung to the CCC, and then to at some point try the UTMB would be really cool. Like I have run 100 miles in an obstacle race, like wearing a wetsuit in the desert in Las Vegas. So I know I can run 100 miles.
UTMB will be easy after that.
It's a very different challenge doing UTMB, but I'm sure it's one that I can do well. And it's just something I want to do in my life. So why not go for it now? So that'll be like, hopefully next year's plan is just I do need to qualify first as well.
Yeah.
So we'll see, like one race at a time there.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome to have this chat. Congratulations on that fantastic victory at the Mont Blanc Marathon, and good luck recovering from COVID. I hope the symptoms remain mild in the next week or two, and that you can hopefully go and smash Sierras and all, and then we'll all be excited to watch you at CCC later this summer.
Cool. Thanks. No, it's been fun. And I'm sure it's not fun being sick, but it's just something you have to take on the chin, and it's better having it now than in 6 weeks' time. So we'll see how it goes, and hopefully I can get back to training sooner rather than later.
All right, Jonathan, thanks so much.